Too young to vote, yet old enough to commit horrors, these teenage killers shocked the world and were sentenced to Tyler Lane Holder. On September 4, 2014, Tarrant County, Texas, witnessed one of the most disturbing sentencing hearings involving a juvenile killer. Tyler Lane Holder, 17 years old, pleaded guilty to capital murder, attempted capital murder, and arson, receiving life in prison for the heinous acts against 6-year-old neighbor Alana Gallagher. His crimes had shattered a quiet Saga Knoll community's sense of safety. But how does a teenager living next door become capable of such calculated evil against an innocent child? On July 1, 2013, Holder abducted Gallagher from her street while she was playing outside. He then committed serious harm against the child, suffocated her by placing a plastic bag over her head, bound her body with duct tape, and dumped it in a tarp near a creek. He also attempted to burn evidence related to the crime. The investigation intensified when DNA evidence from Gallagher's body linked Holder to the crime, and neighbors' suspicions about his behavior contributed to his identification as a suspect. The community had noticed his strange behavior around the time of the disappearance. When police arrived to arrest him on July 23, 2013, Holder shot and wounded Officer Charles Lodato during the confrontation, adding attempted capital murder to his charges. Born around 1996 in Texas, Holder grew up in Saginaw, a suburb of Fort Worth. He was described as a typical teenager with no prior criminal record, but neighbors later reported suspicious behavior around the time of the crime. As a juvenile certified to stand trial as an adult, he pleaded guilty to all charges, avoiding a potential death penalty due to his age. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murder with parole eligibility after 50 years, 40 years for attempted capital murder, and 20 years for arson, all to run concurrently. Holder, now 29, is serving his sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Stiles Unit. He won't be eligible for parole until approximately 2064. With Tyler Lane Holder behind bars, the focus shifts to another teenage killer whose crimes terrorized an entire region, Lee Boyd Malvo. On March 10, 2004, Chesapeake, Virginia became the site of a landmark sentencing that captivated the nation. Lee Boyd Malvo, 17 years old during the crimes, was sentenced to life without parole for his role in the Beltway sniper attacks that terrorized the Washington, D.C. area. His 3-week reign of terror had paralyzed an entire metropolitan region. But how did a troubled teenager from Jamaica become one half of America's most feared killing team? From October 2, 2002, Malvo and accomplice John Allen Muhammad carried out a series of shootings across Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., killing 10 people and injuring 3 others. The attacks began on October 2, 2002, with random shootings using a Bushmaster XM-15 rifle fired from the trunk of a Chevy Caprice. Born February 18, 1985 in Kingston, Jamaica, Malvo had a turbulent childhood. He immigrated illegally to the U.S. in 2001, where he met John Allen Muhammad, who became a manipulative father figure. Malvo acted under Muhammad's influence, whom he viewed as a father figure. The manipulation was so complete that Malvo believed he was fighting a righteous war against society. The duo was caught on October 24, 2002, at a Maryland rest stop after a public tip following media broadcasts of their vehicle description and license plate. They were asleep in the car when arrested by federal and state authorities. In Virginia, he was tried first in Chesapeake for the murder of Linda Franklin on October 14, 2002. He was convicted of capital murder on December 18, 2003, but sentenced to life without parole on March 10, 2004, after the jury spared him the death penalty due to his age and manipulation by Muhammad. Following U.S. Supreme Court rulings banning mandatory life without parole for juveniles, Malvo's sentences were vacated for resentencing. A Maryland appeals court ruled in August 2022 that Malvo must be resentenced. The Virginia Parole Board denied his parole request in August 2022. In September 2024, Malvo's resentencing was indefinitely postponed as Virginia rejected a request to let him out of prison to attend Maryland court in person. Malvo is currently incarcerated at Keene Mountain Correctional Center in Virginia. As Malvo remained behind bars, Texas would witness a teen whose crimes were driven not by obsession, but by the twisted rush of taking a life. Pearl Men.
On January 20th, 2017, Austin, Texas witnessed the sentencing of a teenager whose crime was motivated by the most chilling reason imaginable, pure excitement about taking a life. Pearl Men, 17 years old at the time of her crime, pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for the random stabbing attack on a 23-year-old woman who was napping in a park. Her own words would reveal the disturbing truth about her motivation. But what drives a teenager to hide in bushes and attack a complete stranger for the thrill of it? On November 14, 2015, men randomly stabbed the 23-year-old 21 times in Hyde Park, Austin, Texas. Moen hid in bushes outside an apartment complex, attacked the victim from behind as she walked home, leaving her to die on the sidewalk. The victim survived after emergency surgery. The motive appeared to be thrill-seeking. As Men later wrote in her diary, "I stabbed an innocent woman to death earlier today. It was absolutely fantastic.
Murder gives me a high unlike any other." These chilling words revealed a complete lack of remorse and a disturbing enjoyment of causing harm. Born around 1998 in Texas, Men had a history of substance use and psychological issues, but no prior criminal record. She was a high school student in Austin at the time, described as troubled with mental health challenges. Men was caught after police found her diary during a search related to the investigation, along with witness descriptions and evidence linking her to the scene. Her own written confession became the key evidence against her. She was charged with attempted murder. As part of a plea agreement, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison with credit for time served. Her first parole review was in November 2017, which was denied. Men is serving her sentence at the Hilltop Unit in Gatesville, Texas. After Men's violent spree, another Texas teen would captivate headlines, not just for crime, but for turning his escape into a viral hit. TK. On April 15, 2025, San Antonio, Texas witnessed the final chapter of a case that had captivated hip-hop culture and the criminal justice system. Tamor Trayvon McIntyre, known as rapper TK, was sentenced to 80 years in prison for his second murder conviction to run concurrently with his previous 55-year sentence. His crimes had turned him from rising rapper into one of America's most notorious young killers. But how did a teenage rapper turn his criminal exploits into chart-topping music while on the run for murder? Born June 16, 2000 in Long Beach, California, McIntyre moved to Texas as a child. He grew up in Arlington with gang affiliations and pursued rap music, gaining fame with the race while fugitive. In the first case, on July 26, 2016, at age 16, McIntyre participated in a home invasion robbery in Mansfield, Texas, where 21-year-old Ethan Walker was shot and killed during the robbery. A jury convicted him of murder on July 19, 2019, and sentenced him to 55 years in prison on July 23, 2019. He fled while on ankle monitor in March 2017, releasing the song The Race, glorifying his escape. The song became a viral hit, earning millions of views and turning his criminal flight into entertainment. While on the run on April 23, 2017, at age 16, McIntyre robbed and fatally shot 23-year-old photographer Mark Anthony Soliver in a Chick-fil-A parking lot in San Antonio, Texas, during a drug deal gone wrong. He was recaptured in Elizabeth, New Jersey on June 30, 2017. Tried as an adult in Bahar County District Court, he was found guilty of murder on April 14, 2025, and sentenced to 80 years on April 15, 2025. The concurrent sentence means he effectively faces 55 years with parole eligibility after half the term.
McIntyre is incarcerated at the John B. Connolly Unit, K.S. County, Texas. His case represents how social media and music can glorify criminal behavior among young people. From a teenage rapper turning his crimes into chart-topping hits, we now move to a teen who betrayed her own family in a chilling act of premeditated murder. Tia Marie Mitchell Skinner. On September 16, 2011, St. Clair County, Michigan, delivered a sentence that shocked even experienced prosecutors. Tia Marie Mitchell Skinner, 17 years old at the time of her crime, was sentenced to mandatory life without parole for orchestrating the murder of her adoptive father and attempted murder of her adoptive mother. Her calculated betrayal of family trust had ended in tragedy. But what could drive an adopted teenager to recruit killers to eliminate the very people who had given her a home? On November 12, 2010, angry over strict rules, Skinner recruited two accomplices, Jonathan Kurtz and James Preston, providing them with maps and instructions to stab her parents while she waited outside.
Her father, Paul Skinner, was stabbed over 20 times and died. Her mother, Mara Skinner, survived after being stabbed multiple times and identified the attackers. Born December 8, 1992 in Michigan, Skinner was adopted by Paul and Mara Skinner after her birth by a prison inmate. She was a high school student in Yale, Michigan, with conflicts over strict parental rules, including phone and dating restrictions. The planning was extensive and premeditated. Skinner provided detailed maps of the house, timing information, and specific instructions to her accomplices. She positioned herself away from the scene to establish an alibi while directing others to commit the act. The accomplices were caught fleeing the scene, and Skinner was arrested after her mother's testimony and evidence of her planning via text messages. Her electronic communications revealed the extent of her involvement in planning the attack.
Skinner was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder. Tried as an adult in St. Clair County Circuit Court, a jury convicted her on all counts. Following Miller v. Alabama 2012, she was resentenced on July 11, 2013, again to life without parole after a hearing considering her youth. Skinner remains at Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility, serving life without parole. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases involving young killers, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Skinner's shocking premeditation closed one chapter, but in Houston, another teen would exploit affection and trust to deadly ends. Kiona Samira Elmo. On August 7, 2024, Houston, Texas witnessed the conclusion of a case that had shaken the prestigious Lamar High School community.
Kaya Samriel Mouton, who was 16 at the time of her crime, was sentenced to 23 years in prison for her role in luring classmate Dinzy Mack to his death. Her manipulation of trust and friendship had led to a young man's murder. But how does a teenage girl exploit someone's feelings for her to set up their execution? On November 13, 2018, knowing Mack had a crush on her, Mouton texted him to meet outside the school for a supposed date, leading him to a wooded area where accomplice Kendrick Johnson ambushed, robbed, and fatally shot him during a botched robbery. The crime shocked the affluent River Oaks community where the school was located. Born around 2002 in Houston, Texas, Mouton was a student at Lamar High School with no detailed public family background. Reports suggest she lived a typical teen life before becoming involved in the robbery plot that would end in murder. The plan was cruel in its simplicity. Mouton knew that Mack had romantic feelings for her and used those emotions to lure him to an isolated location. She sent specific messages arranging the meeting, knowing that her accomplice would be waiting to rob him. Mouton was caught after police traced her communications with Mack and Johnson along with witness statements. Her text messages provided a clear trail of evidence showing her role in setting up the victim. Mouton was charged with murder as a party to the crime and certified to stand trial as an adult. In the Harris County District Court, a jury convicted her in August 2024 after deliberating for several hours. She was sentenced to 23 years in prison with parole eligibility after half the term. Johnson was sentenced to life, while a second shooter remains at large, demonstrating how some accomplices escape justice while others face the consequences. After Mutton manipulated a classmate's feelings for deadly gain, Wisconsin would see a far younger offender commit a shockingly brutal murder. Nathan Popp. On August 13, 2013, Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, delivered a sentence that would test every assumption about childhood innocence. Nathan Popp, only 13 years old when he committed his crime, was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 30 years for the brutal murder of 78-year-old Barbara Olson. His case would redefine how the justice system views juvenile killers. But how does a 13-year-old child become capable of participating in such a horrific act against an elderly woman? On September 17, 2012, Popp and friend Antonio Barrow murdered Barrow's 78-year-old great-grandmother, Barbara Olson, in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin. Motivated by robbery for money, stealing $150 in jewelry, the boys entered Olson's home. Barrow struck her with a hatchet, and Popp hit her with a hammer. Born around 1999 in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, Papa was a middle school student with no prior record. He became influenced by friend Antonio Barrow in what started as a robbery-motivated crime but escalated to unthinkable levels. After the murder, they hid the body in the garage, cleaned up, and buried evidence. The level of planning and cover-up showed a disturbing sophistication for such young perpetrators. The boys confessed after Barrow bragged at school, leading to a tip. Police found blood evidence and the body. The casual bragging about such a serious crime revealed how disconnected they were from the gravity of their actions. Both were charged as adults with first-degree intentional homicide. Pope's trial in Sheboygan County Circuit Court began June 17, 2013, and a jury convicted him on June 20, 2013. He was sentenced considering his youth, but the crime's brutality resulted in life in prison with parole eligibility after 31 years. Appeals were denied in 2017. His parole eligibility won't come until 2043, when he'll be 45 years old. As Papa faced decades behind bars, another teen in Texas would make a fatal decision that destroyed both friendship and family hope. John Dewar. On January 8, 2025, San Antonio, Texas concluded a case that had begun with hope for a new year, but ended in senseless tragedy. John Dewar, 17 years old at the time of his crime, was sentenced to 30 years in prison for shooting and killing his friend Jaden Perez during a drug deal gone wrong on New Year's Eve 2023. His case represents how quickly teenage friendships can turn deadly. But what drives a teenager to kill someone he considered a friend over a drug transaction? On December 31, 2023, Dewar shot and killed friend Jaden Perez during a drug deal gone wrong. The New Year's Eve shooting shattered two families and ended what should have been a celebration. Born around 2006 in San Antonio, Texas, Dewar was a teenager involved in drug-related activities. No detailed family background is publicly available beyond the crime context, but his involvement in drug dealing at such a young age suggests a troubled path. The circumstances of the shooting suggest that what started as a routine drug transaction between friends escalated into fatal confrontation. The details of exactly what went wrong remain limited in public records, but the outcome was irreversible. Dewar was arrested on February 29, 2024, as a person of interest. The investigation took nearly 2 months before authorities had enough evidence to make an arrest. He pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced in Bihar County to 30 years. By pleading guilty, he avoided a lengthy trial and the possibility of an even longer sentence. As Dewar faced decades for killing a friend, another Texas teen would claim a controversial motive for a horrific act against a classmate. Her, Milo Morales. On January 31, 2013, Brazoria County, Texas witnessed the sentencing of a case that would become a flashpoint in discussions about hate crimes and immigration.
Hermilo Vildo Morales, 19 years old at the time of sentencing, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for beating classmate Joshua Wilkerson to death with a wooden rod. His claim of gay panic defense would be rejected by the jury. But what drives someone to kill a classmate and then try to justify it based on alleged unwanted advances? On November 16, 2010, after giving Wilkerson a ride home from school, Morales beat him to death with a wooden rod, claiming Wilkerson made an unwanted advance. He bound Wilkerson's hands and feet, partially burned the body, and dumped it in a field. Born around 1991 in Bly, Morales was brought illegally to the U.S. at age 10 by his parents. He grew up in Pearland, Texas, attended high school with the victim, and was undocumented with no prior record. Morales confessed during police questioning on November 19, 2010, after being identified as the last person seen with Wilkerson. His confession provided details about the crime that only the perpetrator would know. The gay panic defense claimed that Morales acted in sudden passion after an unwanted advance. However, the extent of the injuries and the subsequent cover-up suggested premeditation rather than a moment of panic. In Brazoria County District Court, trial began in January 2013. A jury convicted him on January 29, 2013, rejecting the sudden passion defense. The jury saw through the defense strategy and focused on the brutality of the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole on January 31, 2013. Appeals were denied in 2014. Morales is at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's Polinsky Unit. His case became a political talking point about immigration and crime, but at its core remains a story of a young life senselessly taken. After Morales claimed a controversial motive for murder, the next case would challenge the nation's approach to juvenile life sentences. Brett Jones. On April 22, 2021, the United States Supreme Court upheld a sentence that had sparked national debate about juvenile justice. Brett Jones, who was 15 years old when he murdered his grandfather, had his life without parole sentence confirmed in the landmark case Jones v. Mississippi. His case would reshape how courts handled juvenile life sentences across America. But what transforms a troubled teenager's family argument into a deadly assault on the person trying to help him? On August 9, 2004, during an argument over Jones's girlfriend staying in the home, Jones stabbed his grandfather, Burtis Jones, 8 times with a steak knife and then a second knife after the first broke. The killing occurred in the kitchen, and Jones attempted to resuscitate him before fleeing. Born July 17, 1989 in Mississippi, Jones had a traumatic childhood with mistreatment from his stepfather, leading him to flee to his grandfather's home. He had no prior criminal history, but family conflicts had been escalating. The argument that led to the fatal stabbing centered on Jones's relationship with his girlfriend and his grandfather's rules about her staying in the house. What started as a typical teenage dispute escalated when emotions and anger overcame rational thought. He was caught nearby after police responded to the scene. Jones had attempted to help his grandfather after the stabbing, showing some immediate remorse, but it was too late to save him. Jones was charged with murder and tried as an adult in Lee County Circuit Court. A jury convicted him in 2005, and under Mississippi law at the time, he received a mandatory sentence of life without parole on August 12, 2005. Following Miller v. Alabama 2012, he was resentenced on December 18, 2015, again to life without parole after a hearing considering his youth and rehabilitation potential. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the sentence on April 22, 2021, ruling no separate finding of permanent incorrigibility was required. Jones, 36, is at the Mississippi State Penitentiary serving life without parole. His case established important precedent about how juvenile life sentences can be imposed and reviewed. The stories of these 10 teenage killers reveal the darkest potential of youth when innocence is stripped away by violence, manipulation, and poor choices. Sarah Grace Patrick.
On February 20th, 2025, Carroll County, Georgia became the scene of a family massacre that exposed the twisted intersection of murder and social media fame.
Sarah Grace Patrick, just 14 years old, shot and killed her mother, Kristen Braca, and stepfather, James Brock, then launched a calculated campaign to gain internet fame from their deaths. But what drives a teenage girl to murder her parents and then manipulate social media to become a viral sensation? After her younger sibling discovered the bloodied bodies, Sarah called 911 playing the devastated daughter. But her most disturbing behavior came afterward. She began posting grieving TikToks, reaching out to true crime bloggers, and urging online investigators to help solve her parents' murders while building a following of sympathetic viewers. The investigation revealed Sarah had been researching how to monetize trauma content before the murders. She viewed her parents' deaths as content creation opportunities, studying social media algorithms and engagement strategies. Her posts carefully crafted a narrative of a tragic survivor deserving donations and support. Sarah was arrested on July 8, 2025, after investigators discovered her digital footprint contradicted her victim narrative. Search history showed her researching murder methods alongside monetization strategies for trauma content, revealing the calculating mind behind her grief performance. The case remains pending trial, but online manipulation for fame pales in comparison to the face-to-face execution planned with military precision in our next case, Carly Gregg. On March 19, 2024, Brandon, Mississippi became the scene of a family massacre that horrified seasoned detectives. Carly Gregg, just 14 years old, executed her mother and attempted to murder her stepfather with a chilling calculation that defied her age and shocked investigators with its methodical nature. But what drives a teenage girl to invite friends over to see her mother's corpse and casually ask if they're squeamish around dead bodies? When Ashley Smiley discovered vape pens in Carly's bedroom during a routine drug search, the 14-year-old calmly retrieved a .357 Magnum and fired 3 shots into her mother. Security cameras captured her deliberate movements as she methodically planned her next move. Then she texted her friend with bone-chilling casualness, "Are you squeamish around dead bodies?" After showing her friend the corpse, Carly crafted an elaborate trap for her stepfather, sending text messages pretending to be her mother. When Heath arrived, expecting to find his wife, Carly was waiting in ambush. She shot him while telling her friend, "I put 3 in my mom and I got 3 more waiting for my stepdad." Her casual attitude toward double murder demonstrated a level of detachment that stunned investigators. On September 20th, 2024, after less than 2 days of trial, Carly was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, rejecting her insanity defense after hearing evidence of her calculated planning and emotionless execution. The next case shows how some teenagers become so consumed with the idea of killing that they treat murder like a recreational activity. Alyssa Bamonte. On October 21, 2009, St. Martin's, Missouri became a hunting ground for one of history's most psychologically disturbing teenage killers. Alyssa Bamonte, 15, lured 9-year-old Elizabeth Alton into the woods to satisfy her morbid curiosity about what it would feel like to take another human life. But what kind of teenager describes killing an innocent child as amazing in her diary and digs graves in advance like a seasoned predator? At 6:15 p.m., Alyssa approached Elizabeth with a friendly invitation to play in the woods. And the trusting child eagerly followed her older neighbor. Once isolated, Alyssa strangled Elizabeth and stabbed her repeatedly with a kitchen knife she had brought specifically for this purpose. The most chilling evidence came from Alyssa's own diary. "I just killed someone. It was amazing." She described getting over any initial shock and finding the act of murder genuinely enjoyable, treating it like a successful experiment. Alyssa had prepared methodically, digging 2 graves in the woods days earlier.
Her YouTube profile listed cutting and killing people as hobbies, and she posted photos covered in fake blood, showing her long-standing obsession with violence. After murdering Elizabeth, Alyssa buried the body and attended church with her family the next morning, singing hymns as if nothing had happened. When Elizabeth was reported missing, Alyssa joined search parties while knowing exactly where the body was buried. Her performance convincing everyone of her innocence. Alyssa had been in her grandparents' custody since 2002 due to her parents' drug problems and had attempted suicide around 2007. Despite her troubled background, mental health experts agreed that her calculated planning and lack of remorse indicated something far more sinister than typical teenage rebellion. Sentenced to life with parole possibility, Alyssa was denied parole in July 2024 with her next hearing in 2029. But killing for personal satisfaction is nothing compared to the ultimate betrayal committed by lifelong friends in our next case, Sheila Eddy. On July 6, 2012, Star City, West Virginia became the scene of ultimate betrayal when friendship turned deadly. Sheila Eddy, 16, murdered her best friend, Skylar Nye, for the most trivial reason imaginable. She simply didn't want to be friends anymore and feared exposure of her secret. At 12:30 a.m., Sheila and Rachel Shawoff picked up their trusting friend Skylar from her bedroom window for what Skylar believed would be a fun night out. The three girls had been inseparable since age 8, sharing countless memories and deep bonds of childhood friendship. Instead of driving to their usual hangouts, Sheila deliberately drove to a pre-selected secluded area in Pennsylvania. On the count of 3, both girls began stabbing Skylar repeatedly until she collapsed and died. Her final moments filled with confusion and betrayal by her closest friends. For months afterward, Sheila maintained an Academy Award-worthy performance. She helped distribute missing person flyers, organized search parties, comforted Skylar's devastated parents, and even appeared on local news making tearful pleas for her best friend's safe return. Sheila's social media activity was particularly disturbing. She tweeted messages about missing Skylar, shared memories of their friendship, and expressed hope for her safe return. She attended vigils and memorial services, playing the grieving friend while knowing exactly what had happened to Skylar. The motive was revealed when Rachel confessed. They killed Skylar because they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Sheila and Rachel were secretly romantically involved and feared Skylar might expose their relationship. So they chose murder over honest conversation. Sheila was sentenced to life with parole eligibility in May 2028. Throughout the investigation and trial, she showed no remorse, never publicly apologized, and maintained her cold, calculating demeanor that chilled everyone who encountered her. Our next case involves the same murder, but shows how one accomplice took a dramatically different psychological path. Rachel Shea. In the same brutal West Virginia murder that shocked the nation, Rachel Shea, 16, was Sheila Eddy's partner in killing their mutual best friend Skylar Lace, but displayed a completely different psychological response that would ultimately expose their crime. But what makes one teenage killer eventually confess and show apparent remorse while her partner maintains cold indifference? Rachel participated fully in the murder, helping lure Skylar to her death and assisting in burying the body. Like Sheila, she initially helped with the cover-up, distributing missing person flyers and comforting Skylar's family while hiding their involvement. However, Rachel's psychological makeup proved fundamentally different from her partner's. She began suffering severe anxiety attacks, panic episodes, and what appeared to be genuine guilt over their actions. Unlike Sheila's emotional detachment, Rachel claimed to immediately felt remorse after the murder. The case finally broke when Rachel suffered a complete mental breakdown and confessed to the murder in January 2013, leading investigators to Skylar's remains. Her confession revealed shocking details about their planning and the trivial motive behind their friend's death.
Rachel described crying and vomiting immediately after the killing, while Shailia remained emotionally detached and focused on maintaining their alibi. This psychological difference became crucial evidence in understanding the dynamics of their deadly partnership. Rachel led investigators to evidence, provided detailed accounts of their planning, and appeared to show genuine emotion when discussing the crime. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 30 years with parole eligibility after 10 years. However, Rachel has been denied parole multiple times, most recently in July 2024, with her next hearing in 2026.
The next case proves that family loyalty means absolutely nothing when teenage obsession and manipulation take complete control. Aaron Caffey. On March 1, 2008, Elba, Texas became the scene of a family massacre so comprehensive it shattered a small religious community. Aaron Caffey, 16, orchestrated the systematic murders of her mother and innocent younger brothers because her strict Christian parents had the audacity to disapprove of her relationship with an older, inappropriate boyfriend? But what kind of teenage girl provides detailed murder plans, family schedules, and architectural drawings to ensure her loved one's complete extermination while she waits outside listening to their dying screams? At 3 a.m., Aaron's boyfriend, Charlie Wilkinson, and armed accomplices crept into the Caffey family home carrying swords and guns along with detailed plans Aaron had provided.
She had given them precise information about sleeping arrangements, daily routines, and optimal timing for maximum efficiency. The attack was swift and merciless. Her mother, Penny, was nearly decapitated with a samurai sword, the blade cutting so deeply it almost severed her head completely. Blood splattered across walls and the ceiling as the violence reached unimaginable levels. Brothers Matthew, 13, and Tyler, 8, were shot multiple times at point-blank range as they slept peacefully, never having a chance to defend themselves or understand what was happening. The young boys died in terror and confusion, calling out for parents who could no longer help them. The Caffey family were devout Christians who attended Miracle Faith Baptist Church, where Terry served as youth pastor and Aaron sang in the choir. They had homeschooled their children to protect them from negative influences, never imagining the greatest evil would come from within.
After ensuring all family members were dead, the killer set the house on fire to destroy evidence. Aaron waited outside during the entire massacre, showing no emotion as her home became her family's tomb. Miraculously, Father Terry survived despite multiple gunshot wounds and identified Aaron as the mastermind. He crawled from the burning house to a neighbor's home, immediately implicating his daughter in the murders. During interrogation, Aaron showed no remorse for her mother and brother's deaths, appearing more concerned about her boyfriend's fate. Her lack of emotion stunned investigators, who couldn't comprehend such callousness. Sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 25 years, Aaron won't be eligible for parole until 2049. But systematic family annihilation is nothing compared to the prolonged sadistic torture motivated by petty teenage jealousy. Brittany Miller.
On March 24, 2010, Pensacola, Florida became the scene of torture so prolonged and brutal it challenged investigators' understanding of human cruelty. Brittany Miller, 16, actively participated in the systematic torture and murder of 19-year-old Adriana Zimmerman over nothing more than jealousy about a boyfriend's affections. The torture began when Brittany discovered that Adriana had been romantically involved with a boy she liked. Rather than handling this typical teenage rivalry through normal means, Brittany enlisted her mother and neighbor in an elaborate plot to make Adriana suffer in unimaginable ways. They lured Adriana to their home under false pretenses, then began hours of systematic torture. They beat her repeatedly with a crowbar, breaking bones throughout her body, while Adriana begged them to stop and tried to understand why this was happening. When beatings weren't enough, they escalated by shocking her repeatedly with a stun gun, causing convulsions and burns while they watched and laughed. The electrical torture was applied to maximize pain while keeping her conscious to experience every moment of agony. The most horrific part came when they doused Adriana with gasoline and set her on fire, watching as flames consumed her skin. Her screams were so piercing that neighbors' houses away could hear them, though none realized the true horror occurring. Adriana somehow survived the initial burning, but died 16 days later from complications. Her suffering was prolonged far beyond the torture session, as burns covered most of her body and internal injuries caused organ failure. Brittany actively participated with enthusiasm, seeking her mother's approval through increasingly violent acts. Witnesses described her as excited and engaged, genuinely enjoying Adriana's pain rather than participating reluctantly. Born June 2, 1993, Brittany had experienced childhood trauma, including abuse and abandonment. However, experts agreed her background couldn't excuse the sadistic cruelty she displayed during the torture. Despite being juvenile, she was sentenced to life in prison, upheld in 2017 and 2019. Our next case demonstrates how manipulation and greed can drive a teenager to orchestrate the murder of the parent who loved her most, Courtney Scholhoff. On February 10, 2004, Altonte Springs, Florida, became the scene of calculated patricide that exposed the depths of teenage manipulation. Courtney Scholhoff, 16, orchestrated her devoted father's brutal murders because he had the audacity to try protecting her from a relationship with a much older criminal boyfriend. At 11:30 p.m., Courtney's boyfriend, Michael Morin, crept into their home carrying a baseball bat she had specifically selected for the murder. She had spent weeks providing detailed information about Stephen's sleeping habits, daily routines, and optimal timing for an undetected attack. Stephen Scholhoff was a devoted single father who had raised Courtney alone after his divorce, working multiple jobs to provide for her needs. He sacrificed his own happiness and social life to ensure she had opportunities, private schooling, and material advantages many families couldn't afford. Stephen's only crime was attempting to protect his daughter from Michael Morin, a homeless car thief 5 years older with extensive criminal records. When Stephen discovered the inappropriate relationship and tried to end it, Courtney decided her father had to die rather than lose her criminal boyfriend. The murder was particularly savage and prolonged. Moran attacked Stephen with the baseball bat as he slept, striking repeatedly in the head and body. The violence was so extreme that blood splattered across bedroom walls and ceiling, and Stephen's skull fractured in multiple places. During the prolonged beating, Courtney waited in another room, listening to sounds of her father being murdered while showing no emotional reaction. Her complete indifference to his suffering demonstrated absence of conscience or human empathy. After confirming Stephen was dead, they drove to McDonald's and ate calmly as if returning from a normal date. Their behavior immediately following the murder showed complete absence of remorse or recognition of what they had done. The original plan involved disposing of Stephen's body by throwing it from a bridge into a river, making his death appear to be a disappearance rather than murder. However, they were arrested before implementing this additional deception. Initially, Courtney claimed Marana acted independently and she had no knowledge of any murder plot. However, evidence, including her purchase of the murder weapon, proved she was the mastermind behind her father's death. Originally sentenced to life without parole, Courtney was resentenced to 40 years in 2017 due to juvenile sentencing law changes. The father killer chose a homeless criminal over the parent who had sacrificed everything for her future. If you've made it this far and crave the darkest criminal truths, hit the subscribe button. Your support keeps us digging deeper. But patricide, motivated by selfish romance, is nothing compared to America's first school shooting that changed the nation forever. Brenda Spencer. On January 29, 1979, San Diego became the scene of America's first modern school shooting that fundamentally changed the nation. Brenda Spencer, 16, opened fire on Cleveland Elementary School, killing 2 adults and injuring 9 others in an attack that established a horrifying template copied by countless killers for decades. At exactly 8:30 a.m., on a Monday morning, as students and teachers arrived for a normal day, Brenda positioned herself at her bedroom window directly across from the school and began systematically firing. Her elevated position provided clear views of the playground and entrance, where children were most vulnerable. Brenda's first intentional target was 9-year-old Cam Miller, whom she shot simply because he wore blue clothing, her least favorite color. The arbitrary nature of victim selection demonstrated the random evil that would characterize future school shootings. Principal Burton Ragg and custodian Mike Suchar died as heroes, using their bodies to shield wounded children from continued gunfire. Both men consciously chose to place themselves between the shooter and students, sacrificing their lives in acts of courage. 8 children and 1 police officer were wounded before Brenda stopped shooting and barricaded herself inside her house.
The victims suffered injuries ranging from minor wounds to life-changing disabilities that would affect them forever. When police negotiators asked why she committed mass murder, Brenda provided the infamous response, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day." Her casual attitude toward killing children shocked America and challenged fundamental beliefs about violence and motivation. Brenda had grown up in extreme poverty with her alcoholic father after her parents' acrimonious divorce in 1972. She lived in squalid conditions and was essentially abandoned by her father, who showed little interest in her well-being or development. For Christmas 1978, Brenda had asked for a radio, but her father gave her a Ruger 10-22 rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition instead, the exact weapon she used for mass murder. Her later reflection, "I asked for a radio and got a rifle."
During decades of incarceration, Brenda has repeatedly scratched, unforgiven and alone, into her own skin, demonstrating ongoing psychological issues and self-destructive tendencies that suggest continued danger. Sentenced to 25 years to life, Brenda has been denied parole at every hearing, most recently in February 2025. The school shooter remains caged for pioneering mass murder in American education. But even this historic act of terrorism pales compared to the pure evil displayed in our final case, Sharon Carr. In June 1992, Kimberly, Surrey became the hunting ground for what criminologists consider Britain's most evil teenage killer. Sharon Carr, just 12 years old, murdered 18-year-old Katie Ratcliffe by stabbing her 32 times in an unprovoked sexual attack, so savage it earned her the nickname the Devil's Daughter. At 11:30 p.m. on June 7, 1992, Katie Ratcliffe was walking home from her restaurant job, following the same safe route she had taken hundreds of times. She was a responsible young woman earning money for her education, with no way of knowing a 12-year-old predator was stalking her through the darkness. Sharon attacked without warning, provocation, or rational motive, launching into a frenzied assault that was clearly sexual in nature. She stabbed Katie more than 30 times, deliberately prolonging the attack and inflicting wounds that showed she took time to torture her victim before delivering fatal blows. The murder went unsolved for 2 years while Sharon continued normal school activities, maintaining perfect appearances while harboring her murderous secret. Her ability to compartmentalize and hide her true nature was extraordinary and deeply disturbing. The case broke when Sharon viciously attacked another student in June 1994, then began boasting about the earlier murder and revealing disturbing diary entries detailing her ongoing fantasies about the killing. The most psychologically disturbing evidence came from Sharon's diary. "If only I could kill you again.
I promise I would make you suffer more this time, you slag. Your terrified screams turned me on." The sexual gratification she derived from murder horrified investigators and mental health professionals. Sharon was born in Baisay on December 21, 1979, and moved to England in 1986. Her childhood involved extreme poverty and witnessing her mother pour boiling oil on her stepfather during domestic violence. But even this traumatic background couldn't explain her level of evil. Sharon's dangerous behavior has continued and escalated during incarceration. She has repeatedly attacked prison staff and inmates, claimed to believe she's a reptilian creature rather than human, and once tried cutting herself to check if she would bleed like a person. Most chilling, Sharon carved Katie's name into her skin and has repeatedly expressed detailed desires to kill again.
Prison psychiatrists describe her as one of the most dangerous individuals they've encountered, noting her complete absence of empathy and ongoing violent fantasies. Convicted in 1997 and sentenced to life with a minimum of 14 years, Sharon was denied parole in August 2023. Prison officials noted she continues to represent extreme danger to public safety, with no recent updates indicating any possibility of release. These girls may have been young, but their crimes left scars that time will never heal. Tristan Noah Borlaug. On April 10, 2019, Deep Gap, North Carolina became the scene of a family massacre that would shock investigators to their core. The killer was Tristan Noah Borlaug, a 17-year-old who had just been punished for a poor school report, suggesting he might not graduate. What followed was an act of violence so calculated it defied comprehension. But what drove this teenager to transform a simple punishment into a double homicide? The Borlaug family was deeply religious, with Tanya Laya Borlaug known for her strict parenting and unusual behaviors, including screaming at art pieces she believed were demonic. She would lecture Tristan for hours at night, creating a suffocating atmosphere in their home with 8 children, including foster kids. The academic pressure and religious extremism created a powder keg waiting to explode. On that fateful day, Tristan stabbed his mother, Tanya, multiple times, also strangling her and striking her with blunt force. His father, Jeffrey David Borlaug, 43, was stabbed multiple times outside their home. The teenager then attempted to conceal the bodies and clean the crime scene, showing a chilling level of premeditation that suggested this wasn't a momentary loss of control. Tristan was caught the next day in Tennessee, driving his father's truck with blood on his clothing alongside a female companion named Evelyn Faith Jackson. Evidence included surveillance footage and digital communications that revealed the full scope of his planning. On March 2, 2022, after a 2.5-week trial, Tristan was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Greg Horn sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences without parole on March 3, 2022. The sentence was upheld by the North Carolina Court of Appeals in January 2024, ensuring this teenager will never taste freedom again. He remains in a North Carolina state prison where he will spend the rest of his life paying for those few minutes of rage. But our next case proves that some teenagers can commit the unthinkable and still find ways to celebrate. Tyler Hadley. On July 16, 2011, Port St. Lucie, Florida, witnessed one of the most disturbing crimes in recent memory. The perpetrator was Tyler Hadley, a 17-year-old who bludgeoned his parents, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, to death with a hammer, then did something that shocked even hardened investigators. He threw a party over their corpses. But what kind of teenager kills his parents, then invites friends over to celebrate? Tyler had a history of drug use, criminal behavior, including arson and vandalism, and ongoing conflicts with his parents who wanted to enroll him in drug treatment. On that fateful Saturday night, those tensions reached a deadly crescendo. His parents' decision to send him to rehab felt like the ultimate betrayal to a teenager already spiraling out of control. After murdering Blake Hadley, 54, and Mary Jo Hadley, 47, Tyler spent 3 hours methodically cleaning up the scene. He then posted on Facebook inviting friends to a party at his house. The evidence was so overwhelming that both defendants had no choice but to plead guilty. The case also revealed the callous attitude of the killers toward their crime. Kohberger wrote rap lyrics boasting about the murder, showing no remorse for taking an innocent man's life. This demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about the gravity of their actions. Both Earnshaw and Kohberger pleaded guilty to murder. On September 2, 2020, Earnshaw was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years, while Kohberger received 16 years and 8 months. Earnshaw will be eligible for parole in 2042, while Kohberger could be released as early as 2036. From gang initiations to family annihilations to random acts of brutality, these young killers have earned their place behind bars for life. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out.
He remains incarcerated at Gulf Correctional Institution, where he gave an interview in November 2024, discussing his crimes, showing little remorse for the lives he destroyed. Our next case takes us to Michigan, where a family gathering became a scene of unimaginable carnage. Seth Pravaki. On November 29, 1998, Muskegon, Michigan became the site of a Thanksgiving massacre that would haunt the community forever. The killer was Seth Pravaki, an 18-year-old who used a .22 caliber Ruger to execute 5 family members during what should have been a peaceful holiday gathering. This wasn't a moment of rage. It was systematic extermination that turned gratitude into grief. But what could drive a teenager to slaughter his entire family on Thanksgiving? Seth shot and killed his parents, Stephen Pravaki, 50, and Linda Pravaki, 49. His grandfather, John Pravaki, 78. His brother, Jedediah Pravaki, 19. And his brother's girlfriend, April Boss, 19. Each victim was killed execution-style during a delayed Thanksgiving gathering, turning a day of gratitude into a nightmare of blood and terror. The methodical nature of the killings suggested a complete break from reality. The motive remains unclear, though investigators found evidence of family disputes and control issues. Seth had a history of juvenile theft charges and was on antidepressants, suggesting underlying mental health and substance abuse issues. But nothing in his background prepared anyone for the scale of violence he would unleash. Family members described him as quiet and withdrawn, giving no warning of the monster lurking beneath. Seth was caught the next day, November 30th, 1998, after being spotted running from a barn. When confronted by police, he immediately confessed to the murders, showing no remorse for wiping out nearly his entire bloodline. His friend, Stephen Clayton Wallace, was initially charged with helping dispose of the weapon, but was later acquitted. Seth pleaded no contest and was convicted of 5 counts each of first-degree murder and felony firearm charges. On May 27, 1999, he was sentenced to life without parole. But Seth's story didn't end in prison. On July 15, 2010, he was killed during a failed escape attempt at Kinross Correctional Facility, meeting a violent end that mirrored the carnage he had created 12 years earlier. The next case shows us how academic pressure and family expectations can create a perfect storm of deception and murder. Jennifer Pan. On November 8, 2010, Markham, Ontario became the scene of a hit that would expose the dark side of the model minority myth. The mastermind was Jennifer Pan, a 24-year-old who orchestrated the murder of her parents to escape their suffocating expectations and inherit $500,000. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment crime. It was a carefully planned execution disguised as a home invasion. But how did a seemingly perfect daughter become capable of such calculated evil?
Jennifer had been living a double life for years, pretending to be a high-achieving student while actually dropping out of university. Her strict Vietnamese immigrant parents had impossibly high expectations, demanding perfect grades and complete obedience. Jennifer felt trapped between their demands and her own failures, choosing deception over honesty until the lies became impossible to maintain. Jennifer hired hitmen David Milvaganam, Eric Carty, and Lenford Crawford, involving her boyfriend Daniel Wong in the plot. The attack resulted in the death of her mother, Tan Pan, and left her father, Han Pan, permanently blinded. Jennifer claimed she was also a victim, bound and helpless during the home invasion, but investigators quickly saw through her elaborate lies.
Police discovered inconsistencies in her story, mobile device tracking, and over 100 text messages between Jennifer and Wong in the 6 hours before the attack. The digital evidence painted a clear picture of premeditation and coordination that contradicted her victim narrative. After a 10-month trial beginning in March 2014, Jennifer was found guilty in December 2014 and sentenced to life with parole after 25 years. In May 2023, the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial for first-degree murder while upholding the attempted murder conviction confirmed by the Supreme Court in April 2025. She remains at Grand Valley Institution for Women, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her guilt. But our next case involves a teenager whose desire for notoriety led to a massacre that shocked an entire nation. Nicholas Prosper. On September 13, 2023, Luton, England witnessed a family massacre that revealed the terrifying mind of a would-be mass shooter.
The perpetrator was Nicholas Prosper, an 18-year-old who killed his mother and siblings with a shotgun while planning an even deadlier attack on a primary school. This wasn't just family violence. It was a stepping stone to something far worse that could have claimed dozens of innocent lives. But what transforms a teenager into someone capable of planning to massacre children? Nicholas was obsessed with mass shootings and serial killers. Driven by a desire for notoriety and influenced by undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder, he used a double-barreled shotgun to kill his mother, Juliana Falcon, 48, his sister, Giselle Prosper, 13, and his brother Kyle Prosper, 16. But the family murders were just the beginning of his twisted plan to surpass historical massacres and achieve the notoriety he craved. Nicholas fired 7 cartridges, reloading twice during the attack, and stabbed his brother Kyle over 100 times after shooting him. The level of overkill suggested a complete disconnect from reality and humanity. After murdering his family, he intended to proceed to St. Joseph's Primary School to carry out a mass shooting that could have claimed dozens of innocent children's lives, potentially becoming one of the deadliest school attacks in British history. Nicholas was arrested later that day after fleeing the scene, with police finding the shotgun and 33 cartridges hidden in bushes. His detailed plans for the school shooting were uncovered during the investigation, revealing the full scope of his intended massacre and the innocent lives that were saved by his early capture. On February 24, 2025, Nicholas pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and weapons charges. Mrs. Justice Chima Groob sentenced him to life with a minimum term of 49 years on March 19, 2025.
The sentence was referred under the unduly lenient sentence scheme, but upheld by the Court of Appeal on July 16, 2025, ensuring this potential mass shooter will spend most of his life behind bars in a UK prison. Our next case shows how radical extremism can poison young minds and turn children against their own families. Lisa Borch. On October 8, 2014, Kissel, Denmark became the scene of a murder that would expose the reach of ISIS propaganda into European homes. The killer was Lisa Borch, a 15-year-old who stabbed her mother at least 20 times with the help of her 29-year-old boyfriend. This wasn't typical teenage rebellion. It was radicalization turned deadly, showing how online extremism can corrupt young minds. But how did a Danish teenager become so influenced by terrorism that she would kill her own mother? Lisa had become obsessed with ISIS after watching beheading videos online, including footage of British hostages being executed.
Her boyfriend, Bakhtiar Mohammed Abdullah, was an Iraqi refugee who fed her extremist ideology. Together, they planned to join ISIS in Syria after eliminating what they saw as obstacles, starting with Lisa's mother, who opposed their relationship. Lisa and Abdullah stabbed her mother, Tina Romer Holterod, 40, with a kitchen knife during a brutal attack in their family home. The violence was extreme and prolonged, with at least 20 stab wounds inflicted on the victim. After the murder, Lisa called police claiming a white man had run away, a calculated lie designed to deflect suspicion and frame an innocent person. Lisa's chilling indifference during questioning and computer evidence showing her consumption of ISIS propaganda led to her arrest. The digital trail revealed the extent of her radicalization and the methodical planning that went into the murder. In September 2015, both Lisa and Abdullah were found guilty of murder by a court.
Though the court couldn't determine who delivered the fatal wounds, Lisa was sentenced to 9 years, the first year in juvenile detention and the remaining 8 in prison, while Abdullah received 13 years in deportation. The sentences were upheld on appeal in January 2016. Lisa was likely released in 2024 after serving her full sentence, returning to society with blood on her hands. The next case shows how modern technology and gaming addiction can warp a teenager's mind into something truly dangerous. Daniel Patrick. On October 20, 2007, Brighton Township, Ohio, became the scene of a family shooting that would spark national debates about video game violence. The shooter was Daniel Patrick, a 16-year-old who killed his mother and critically wounded his father after they confiscated his copy of Halo 3. This wasn't just teenage anger. It was an addiction turned lethal that would destroy a family forever.
But how could a video game drive a seemingly normal teenager to commit such horrific act? Daniel was described as a normal, happy teenager with no prior psychological problems or criminal record. His father, Mark, was a Pentecostal minister, and the family was deeply religious. But everything changed when Daniel contracted a staph infection and became housebound, discovering the violent video game Halo 3. He became severely addicted, playing up to 18 hours a day without eating or sleeping, which alarmed his parents. When his parents confiscated the game due to its violent content and adult rating, Daniel's obsession turned murderous. He used his father's 9mm Taurus PT-92 handgun to shoot his mother, Susan, multiple times, killing her, and critically wounded his father, Mark, with shots to the head, arms, and chest. The violence was calculated and premeditated. Daniel had taken the lockbox key earlier to access the weapon. After the shooting, Daniel attempted to stage the scene as a murder-suicide by placing the gun in his father's hand, then fled in the family minivan with his precious video game. He was caught during a police chase when he lost control of the vehicle. His sister Heidi had discovered the scene and called 911, while his surviving father identified Daniel as the shooter from his hospital bed. Daniel was tried as an adult from December 15, 2008, with his defense arguing insanity due to video game addiction. The court rejected this defense, and on June 23, 2009, Daniel was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 23 years. He remains incarcerated at Grafton Correctional Institution in Ohio, eligible for parole in 2030. Remarkably, his father, Mark, publicly forgave him, reflecting their family's deep religious faith, even in tragedy. But our next case reveals how twin bonds can become twisted into something far more sinister and deadly. Jasm and Tasmaya Whitehead. On January 13, 2010, Conyers, Georgia witnessed a mattress that would shock the nation with its brutality and the age of its perpetrators.
The killers were Jasmia and Tasmia Whitehead, 16-year-old twins who beat and stabbed their mother to death during a family fight. This wasn't a planned murder. It was an explosion of family tension that turned lethal when sisterly solidarity became a weapon. But what could drive twin sisters to collectively turn on their own mother with such violence? The twins had a tumultuous relationship with their mother, Jarmsha Nikki Whitehead, 34, marked by ongoing family tensions and their mother's strict control. After living with their great-grandmother for years, they had recently been returned to their mother's custody against their wishes, creating a powder keg of resentment and conflict. The forced reunion became a death sentence. During the violent confrontation that started over being late for school, the twins beat their mother with a vase and stabbed her multiple times. The attack was so brutal that bite marks were found on their mother's body, evidence of the desperate struggle that took place. The crime was classified as a crime of passion, but the level of violence suggested deep-seated rage that had been building for years. Initially, the twins claimed they had found their mother dead when they came home from school. They even called 911, crying and screaming about the discovery. But inconsistencies in their stories and the physical evidence, particularly the bite marks that matched their dental records, led to their arrests on May 21, 2010. Rather than face a murder trial, both twins pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter in 2014. Tasmaya was sentenced in January 2014, while Jasmia received her sentence on February 7, 2014, each receiving 30 years in prison. They are incarcerated separately at different Georgia prisons, with Tasmaya eligible for parole in March 2026 and Jasmia in September 2027. The twins, who once shared everything, now face decades apart, paying for their shared crime. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press that bell icon. But our final case involves a teenager whose mental illness created a storm of paranoia and violence that shocked an entire community. Kip Kinkle. On May 20, 1998, Springfield, Oregon became ground zero for a massacre that would forever change how we view juvenile violence. The perpetrator was Kip Kinkle, a 15-year-old who shot his parents at home, then walked into Thurston High School the next day and opened fire on his classmates. This wasn't just a school shooting. It was a family annihilation followed by attempted mass murder that could have claimed dozens more lives. But what transforms a teenager into someone capable of killing everyone closest to him? Kip suffered from undiagnosed paranoid schizophrenia, experiencing hallucinations and delusions that convinced him his actions were necessary. He had been expelled from school for bringing a stolen handgun to campus, creating additional stress and shame. The combination of untreated mental illness and academic failure created a perfect storm of violence that would devastate multiple families. On May 20th, Kip shot and killed his parents, Bill and Faith Kinkle, at their family home. But rather than flee or surrender, he made a decision that would terrorize an entire community. The next day, May 21, 1998, Kip walked into Thurston High School armed with a semi-automatic rifle and handgun, intent on killing as many people as possible. Kip killed 2 students, Ben Walker, 16, and Mike L. Nicolason, 17, and wounded 25 others before being subdued by brave students who tackled him. The carnage could have been much worse if not for the heroic actions of students who risked their lives to stop him. Even after being restrained, Kip continued trying to reach for another weapon. After his arrest, Kip confessed to all crimes and pleaded guilty on September 24, 1999, foregoing an insanity defense despite clear evidence of mental illness. Judge Jack Madison sentenced him to 111 years without parole on November 11, 1999. The sentence was upheld on appeal in January 2011. He remains at Oregon State Correctional Institution, where he continues to file appeals citing juvenile justice reforms, hoping to one day see freedom again.
These stories reveal the terrifying truth about juvenile violence, that age is no barrier to evil and that the most dangerous predators can sometimes be found in our own homes. Some received justice through life sentences, while others found ways to escape their cages through death or early release. Lorraine Thorpe.
On August 2009, Ipswich, Suffolk became the scene of crimes so disturbing they would earn a 15-year-old the title of Britain's youngest female double killer. Lorraine Thorpe tortured and murdered 41-year-old Rosalind Hunt over several days using methods including beating, stamping, and using a cheese grater on her skin. 9 days later, she killed her own father, 43-year-old Desmond Thorpe, by smothering and beating him to prevent him from revealing her first crime. But what transforms a teenager into someone capable of such calculated cruelty? Thorpe had been part of Ipswich's street drinking culture since age 13, living in poverty and associating with a group of violent individuals. Her upbringing was marked by instability and exposure to harmful influences that gradually warped her understanding of acceptable behavior. The environment she grew up in normalized aggression and callousness, creating the perfect conditions for her descent into evil. The crimes themselves revealed a level of sadistic pleasure that shocked investigators. The torture of Rosalind Hunt wasn't quick or impulsive. It was sustained over days, suggesting Thorpe derived satisfaction from causing pain. When her father threatened to expose her, she eliminated him with the same cold calculation, demonstrating that family bonds meant nothing to her twisted mind. Following the discovery of both bodies, Thorpe was arrested and charged with double murder. Her youth didn't generate sympathy from the court, as the premeditated and sadistic nature of her crimes spoke to a deeply disturbed individual who posed a continued threat to society. In 2010, Thorpe was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years. She remains incarcerated at HM Prison Fosthall in Derbyshire, having been denied parole in October 2023. Her next parole hearing is scheduled for September 2025. Though given the nature of her crimes, release seems unlikely.
Our next case shows how a teenage dispute can escalate to deadly consequences when combined with poor decision-making. Sheila Hernandez Rivas. On April 2017, Lawrenceville, Georgia, witnessed a tragedy that would destroy multiple families over what investigators believe was a dispute or robbery attempt gone wrong. Sheila Hernandez Rivas, just 17 years old, stabbed 21-year-old William Tons multiple times, ending his young life and forever altering her own future. What makes this case particularly tragic is how quickly a confrontation spiraled into irreversible consequences. But what drives a teenager to choose deadly force over walking away from conflict? The details surrounding the incident remain limited, but evidence suggests the attack likely occurred during a dispute or attempted robbery attempt. The multiple stab wounds indicate this wasn't a single moment of poor judgment, but a sustained attack that demonstrated either panic or deliberate intent to harm.
The victim, William Tons, was only 21 years old with his whole life ahead of him. What sets Sheila apart from many other cases is her immediate recognition of what she had done. Rather than attempting to flee or cover up her crime, she made the decision to turn herself in to the authorities. This action suggests some level of remorse or understanding of the gravity of her actions, though it came too late to save her victim's life. Hernandez Rivas turned herself in after the crime, cooperating with law enforcement. Her willingness to accept responsibility may have influenced the legal proceedings, as prosecutors and judges often consider such cooperation when determining charges and sentencing. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging her role in Tancha's death. The court sentenced her to 11 to 27.5 years in prison with parole eligibility in 2033.
She currently remains incarcerated, serving a sentence that will likely keep her behind bars for most of her 20s and into her 30s. But our next case involves one of the youngest killers in recent memory, whose obsession with fictional characters led to real-world horror. Morgan Geyser. On May 31, 2014, Winnetka, Wisconsin became the setting for one of the most bizarre and disturbing attempted murders in recent American history. Morgan Geyser, just 12 years old, stabbed her friend Peyton Littner 19 times in a desperate attempt to appease the fictional character known as Slender Man. This case shocked the nation, not just because of the young age of the perpetrator, but because it revealed how online fiction could influence vulnerable minds to commit real-world harm.
But how does a 12-year-old become so disconnected from reality that fiction becomes more compelling than friendship? Geyser had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, experiencing delusions that included believing she could communicate with fictional characters. Her mental illness, combined with exposure to disturbing online content, created a perfect storm that would nearly cost her best friend's life. The Slender Man character, a tall, faceless figure from internet folklore, had become so real in Geyser's mind that she believed she needed to kill to prove her devotion. The attack took place during what was supposed to be a fun sleepover celebration. Geyser and her accomplice lured Peyton into a wooded area under the pretense of playing hide-and-seek. Once isolated, they launched their assault, leaving Peyton with 19 stab wounds, including injuries that barely missed major arteries. Miraculously, Peyton survived by crawling to a road where a cyclist found her. The case became controversial due to Geyser's young age and diagnosed mental health conditions. Legal experts debated whether someone so young could truly understand the consequences of their actions, especially when influenced by severe mental illness and online manipulation. Geyser was arrested after the attack and eventually pleaded guilty in 2018. Initially sentenced to 40 years to life, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity in 2017 and committed to a mental health institution. In January 2025, she was released from the Winnebago Mental Health Institute and now lives in a group home in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, under conditional release with supervision until 2058. The next case involves another family tragedy where teenage frustration exploded into deadly consequences. Cassandra Bjorg. On April 2017, Lawrenceville, Georgia, witnessed another family annihilation when teenagers chose murder over communication with their guardians.
Cassandra Bjorg, 17 years old, along with her boyfriend Johnny Ryder, killed her grandparents, Wendy and Randall Bjork, then remained in the house with the bodies while hosting parties. The case shocked investigators not just for its brutality, but for the callous behavior that followed. But how do teenagers become so detached from humanity that they can celebrate while surrounded by the victims of their own crimes? The couple had been staying in the Bjorg home, and after committing the murders, they continued living there with the decomposing bodies. This behavior suggests either complete psychological detachment or a level of comfort with death that defies normal human responses. The fact that they invited friends over for parties while the victims lay nearby reveals a disturbing lack of empathy. The decision to remain at the crime scene for an extended period indicates poor planning and possibly a belief that they could continue indefinitely without consequences.
Their behavior during this time, partying and carrying on normal social activities, demonstrated a complete disconnection between their actions and any sense of guilt or responsibility. Law enforcement eventually discovered the situation and arrested both teenagers. The evidence was overwhelming given that they had essentially been living at the crime scene for days or weeks after the murders. Both Cassandra and her boyfriend pleaded guilty to the murders in 2018. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 60 years, meaning neither will be eligible for release until around 2078. Cassandra remains incarcerated, facing the reality that she will likely spend most of her life behind bars for choosing murder over finding healthy ways to resolve family conflicts. But our next case proves that even brief encounters can turn deadly when teenagers make impulsive decisions. Jordan Jobson.
On August 2007, Wall's End, North Tyneside, England, became the scene of a deadly altercation that would forever change multiple lives. Jordan Jobson, just 15 years old, stabbed 18-year-old Samantha Magin multiple times during what investigators believe was a fight influenced by alcohol and substance use. The case highlights how quickly teenage disputes can escalate to irreversible tragedy. But what transforms a typical teenage argument into a deadly encounter that destroys multiple families? The altercation occurred during circumstances where both alcohol and controlled substances were believed to be factors, impairing judgment and escalating what might otherwise have been a minor disagreement. The presence of a knife transformed a potentially minor scuffle into a deadly encounter that would haunt everyone involved. Samantha Magin was only 18 years old, just beginning her adult life when it was cut tragically short.
The 3-year age gap between victim and perpetrator highlights how young people can become involved in dangerous situations that spiral beyond their control or comprehension. Following the stabbing, Jobson was arrested and charged with murder. The evidence against her was substantial, leading to a conviction that would result in significant prison time despite her young age. In 2008, Jobson was convicted and initially sentenced to life with a minimum term of 15 years. However, this was later reduced to 11 years on appeal, reflecting considerations of her youth and the circumstances surrounding the crime. She was released on license in December 2020, but returned to prison in May 2021 for breaching the conditions of her release. Her current status remains unclear, with no updates available since 2021. The case demonstrates the ongoing challenges of reintegrating young offenders into society and the difficulties they face in rebuilding their lives after committing serious crimes.
If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button. But our next case involves one of the most brutal family attacks in recent memory, where mental illness became a weapon of unimaginable destruction. Isabella Guzman. On August 28, 2013, Aurora, Colorado witnessed one of the most horrifying family homicides in the state's history. Isabella Guzman, 18 years old, attacked her mother, Yoonmi Hoy, in their bathroom, inflicting 79 separate stab wounds in an assault so sustained and brutal that investigators struggled to comprehend the level of rage involved. The case would expose the tragic consequences of untreated mental illness in young adults. But what drives someone to inflict 79 separate wounds on their own mother? Guzman was suffering from severe schizophrenia that had gone undiagnosed and untreated, causing delusions and paranoia that completely distorted her perception of reality. The mental illness had progressed to the point where she no longer recognized her mother as a loving parent, but instead viewed her as a threat that needed to be eliminated. Mental health experts later explained how schizophrenia can completely alter family relationships in the mind of the sufferer. The attack occurred in the family bathroom, a confined space that made the sustained assault even more horrifying. The 79 wounds indicated this wasn't a brief moment of rage, but an extended attack where Guzman had multiple opportunities to stop, but continued inflicting harm. Each wound represented another moment where normal human emotions and familial bonds should have intervened, but were absent due to her severe mental illness. The aftermath revealed both the depth of Guzman's psychological disturbance and some remaining connection to reality. She turned herself into authorities after the attack, suggesting that despite her severe mental illness, some part of her understood the gravity of her actions. However, her behavior during police interviews demonstrated the extent of her psychological disconnection. In 2014, Guzman was found not guilty by reason of insanity, a verdict that recognized her severe mental illness as the primary factor in her mother's death. Rather than facing prison, she was committed to a mental health facility where she could receive appropriate psychiatric treatment. As of 2021, she remained in a mental hospital, with no recent updates on her condition or potential release.
Her case continues to serve as a stark reminder of the importance of early mental health intervention and the tragic consequences when severe psychological conditions go unrecognized and untreated. Our next case shows how a simple date can turn deadly when teenage impulsiveness meets poor decision-making. Emma Cusack.
On June 29, 2023, Las Vegas, Nevada became the scene of a shocking murder that would expose the dangerous reality of modern dating and teenage impulsiveness. Emma Cusack, 17 years old, shot Charlie Satatusi twice in the head during an argument at the Luxor Hotel. The case highlights how quickly casual encounters can turn deadly when combined with access to weapons and poor impulse control. But what transforms a dating dispute into cold-blooded execution in a matter of minutes? The incident occurred during what was supposed to be a casual encounter between Cusack and Satui, who was 36 years old. The significant age gap raises questions about the nature of their relationship and the circumstances that brought them together. The hotel setting suggests this was a planned meeting, making the subsequent escalation to deadly force even more shocking.
The argument that preceded the shooting appears to have been impulsive rather than premeditated, but research suggests the act itself was a calculated decision rather than an accident. The fact that Cusack shot Satui twice in the head indicates either panic-driven overkill or a deliberate attempt to ensure he wouldn't survive. Following the shooting, Cusack demonstrated some level of awareness of her actions by contacting authorities herself. She turned herself in after calling police, suggesting that despite the impulsive nature of the crime, she understood she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Cusack pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging her role in Satustegi's death. She was sentenced to 11 to 27.5 years in prison, with parole eligibility in 2033. She remains incarcerated, serving a sentence that will keep her behind bars through her 20s and possibly into her 30s, paying the price for a moment of deadly impulsiveness.
But our final case involves perhaps the most prolific young female killer on this list, whose domestic disputes escalated to double homicide, Leslie Garcia Juarez. Between December 2019 and December 2020, Dunthon, Norcross, Georgia became the scenes of two separate homicides that would eventually be connected to the same teenage perpetrator. Leslie Garcia Juarez, just 16 years old, shot and killed two young men, Oviel Montano and Adolfo, in what investigators believe were domestic-related disputes. The case represents one of the most prolific examples of teenage female violence in recent Georgia history. But what drives a 16-year-old to commit not one, but two separate murders within a year? The first murder occurred on December 30, 2019, when Juarez shot Oviel Montano in Norcross. Almost exactly 1 year later, she shot Adolfo Mabel on December 29, 2020, in Dunth. Both cases were described as domestic-related, suggesting personal relationships gone wrong rather than random acts of aggression. The fact that both victims were young men in their early 20s and both incidents were classified as domestic-related suggests a pattern of behavior where Juarez resorted to deadly force to resolve personal conflicts. The year between murders indicates this wasn't a crime of passion, but potentially a learned response to relationship problems. The investigation process revealed the connection between the two cases. Juarez was first arrested for Amable's murder on December 31, 2020. While in custody, she was charged with Montano's murder on March 19, 2021, suggesting investigators had connected evidence from both scenes. Despite her young age, Juarez was charged as an adult due to the severity and repetitive nature of her crimes.
However, no sentencing information is available, and her current status remains unknown as of 2025, leaving questions about how the justice system ultimately handled this unprecedented case of teenage serial homicide. Nayang Mai Chamal on March 7, 2022, Des Moines, Iowa witnessed one of the most shocking school-related shootings in the state's history. Nayang Mai Chamdul, just 14 years old, participated in a coordinated drive-by shooting outside East High School that killed 15-year-old Jose David Lopez and critically injured two others. This wasn't a spontaneous act of teenage violence. It was a carefully planned execution carried out by multiple shooters from 3 vehicles. But what drives a 14-year-old to become a cold-blooded killer in broad daylight? The attack was described as a bloodthirsty revenge mission following an earlier incident at Chamuel's family home, part of an ongoing gang rivalry that had been escalating for months.
Chamuel fired shots from a .38 revolver from the back seat of a Ford F-150 truck, part of a coordinated attack involving 10 teenagers. The precision and planning of the assault showed a level of organization that shocked investigators and revealed the sophisticated nature of modern gang warfare. The victims were innocent students simply trying to get an education. Jose David Lopez was just 15 years old when his life was cut short, while 16-year-old Jessica Lopez and 18-year-old Camry Ortega fought for their lives in critical condition. The shooting occurred during school hours, turning what should have been a safe space into a crime scene. Parents arriving to pick up their children were met with police tape and ambulances, forever changing their perception of school safety. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how easily a 14-year-old was recruited into such violence.
The gang structure that facilitated this attack represents a broader crisis in American cities where children are being weaponized for adult conflicts. The systematic nature of the recruitment process means that Chaim Duell was likely groomed for violence long before he ever pulled the trigger. Chamuel was identified through surveillance footage and witness accounts, leading to his arrest as part of a larger group of 10 individuals charged in connection with the shooting. On July 21, 2023, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. On May 30, 2025, at age 17, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years and ordered to pay $150,000 in restitution. He remains incarcerated at the Boys State Training School in Eldora, where he has earned his high school diploma, showing that even behind bars, rehabilitation efforts continue.
Our next case shows how gang initiation can transform a teenager into a remorseless killer over something as trivial as a traffic accident. Remy Cordova. On February 20, 2021, Denver, Colorado became the scene of a senseless murder that would expose the deadly reality of gang recruitment. Remy Cordova, just 14 years old, killed 32-year-old Pamela Cabrielas with an AR-15 after a minor traffic collision near Keyfax Avenue and Interstate 25. This wasn't road rage. It was calculated murder designed to prove his worth to the East Side Crips gang. But how does a minor fender bender escalate to cold-blooded execution in a matter of minutes? Prosecutors argued that Cordova's actions were motivated by a desire to gain status within the East Side Crips gang, describing the killing as senseless and cold-blooded. The victim, Pamela Cabrielas, was an accomplished real estate agent and mother whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The randomness of her selection made the crime even more terrifying, as it demonstrated that anyone could become a victim of gang violence. Cordova's background reveals a disturbing pattern of childhood trauma that unfortunately characterizes many young gang recruits. Court records indicate he had endured near constant physical, emotional, and inappropriate treatment from a young age, which may have contributed to his violent behavior and susceptibility to gang recruitment. However, this background didn't excuse his actions or generate sympathy from the court, as thousands of children face similar trauma without turning to murder. Following a police investigation, Cordova was charged as an adult due to the severity of his crimes. On November 1, 2024, he was convicted of first-degree murder. During his sentencing, Cordova showed no remorse and continued to claim innocence despite overwhelming evidence against him, demonstrating a complete lack of accountability for his actions. On December 12, 2024, at age 18, Cordova was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 40 years, plus an additional 8 years for attempted murder to be served consecutively.
He will not be eligible for parole until 2064, ensuring this dangerous young man remains behind bars for decades. But our next case involves a school shooter whose lack of remorse shocked an entire community, Thomas T.J. Lane. On February 27, 2012, Chardon High School in Ohio became the site of one of the most chilling school shootings in American history. TJ, 17 years old, opened fire with a .22 caliber handgun, killing 3 students: Demetrius Houlihan, 16, Russell King Jr., 17, and Daniel Palmer, 16, and injuring 3 others. What made this case particularly disturbing wasn't just the violence, but Lane's complete lack of remorse and his taunting of victims' families. But what could drive a teenager to commit such calculated violence against his own classmates?
Lane's motive remains unclear to this day, with investigators finding no specific reason for targeting his victims. Court documents revealed a tumultuous family background marked by domestic violence, but nothing that adequately explained his actions. He was a student at an alternative school and had difficulty socializing, but thousands of teenagers face similar challenges without turning to mass violence. The attack itself was swift and calculated. Lane entered the school cafeteria during the morning before classes and began firing indiscriminately at students who were simply trying to start their day. The randomness of his target selection made the crime even more terrifying, as it demonstrated that anyone could have been a victim. Lane was arrested near his car outside the school shortly after the shooting, identified through witness accounts. What happened next shocked even seasoned court observers.
During his sentencing hearing, Lane showed up wearing a T-shirt with the word killer written on it and proceeded to taunt the families of his victims, showing no remorse whatsoever. Lane pleaded guilty to the charges and was sentenced on March 19, 2013, at age 18, to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He remains incarcerated at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, where he has a history of disciplinary problems, including a 2014 escape attempt. He will never be eligible for parole, ensuring he stays behind bars for his crimes. The next case takes us to a family home where a teenager's violence knew no bounds: Joseph Spencer. On September 3, 2012, Doddridge County, West Virginia, became the scene of a family massacre that would leave an entire community searching for answers. Joseph Spencer, just 16 years old, murdered his parents, Frederick Arthur Spencer III, 49, and Dixie Lee Spencer, 47, along with his 9-year-old sister, Patience Spencer, using a 9mm handgun. What made this case even more chilling was Spencer's decision to call 911 and turn himself in immediately after the killings. But what could drive a seemingly quiet teenager to wipe out his entire family in one night of violence? Spencer was described as quiet and intelligent with no prior record of violence, making his crimes all the more shocking to those who knew him. His grandfather suggested the acts were not premeditated and might have been related to an undiagnosed mental health issue, but investigators never determined a clear motive. The randomness and brutality of the killings suggested a complete break from reality. The murders took place in the family's rural home, where Spencer systematically killed each member of his immediate family. The fact that he included his 9-year-old sister Patience in his violent spree demonstrated a level of callousness that defied comprehension. After the killings, Spencer immediately called emergency services to report what he had done. Spencer turned himself in by calling 911 after committing the murders, demonstrating some awareness of his actions, but offering no explanation for his violence. His cooperation with authorities did little to mitigate the severity of his crimes. On January 16, 2014, Spencer pleaded guilty to all charges. On February 10, 2014, at age 18, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences, 2 concurrent and 1 consecutive, making him eligible for parole after 30 years. He remains incarcerated in a West Virginia prison and will be eligible for parole in 2044. But our next case shows how territorial disputes can lead to deadly cases of mistaken identity. Cotai Westcott and Riley Tiver. On January 27, 2024, Bristol, UK witnessed a double murder that would expose the deadly reality of postcode rivalries among British youth. Cotai Westcott, 17, and Riley Toiver, 18, along with two other teenagers, murdered 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon in a case of mistaken identity. The victims were completely innocent, killed simply because they happened to be in the wrong area at the wrong time. But how did a territorial dispute over postcodes escalate to the murder of two innocent teenagers? The murders were revenge for bricks being thrown at a house in a rival area, part of an ongoing postcode rivalry between different neighborhoods in Bristol. Mason Rist and Max Dixon were simply friends walking through Null West when they were mistakenly identified as being connected to the earlier incident. Their only crime was living in the area. The attack was swift and brutal.
The four attackers, armed with weapons, confronted the two boys and launched a savage assault that left both victims fatally wounded. The randomness of the selection and the innocence of the victims made this case particularly tragic for the Bristol community. The killers were arrested at the scene, with CCTV evidence proving crucial in securing convictions. The technology that captured their crimes ensured there was no escape from justice. Despite their attempts to flee, both Westcott and Toiver were convicted of 2 counts of murder. On December 19, 2024, Westcott was sentenced to life with a minimum term of 23 years and 44 days, while Toiver received 23 years and 47 days. Both will be eligible for parole in 2047. In a shocking display of continued callousness, Westcott set up an Instagram account in January 2025 to post rap tracks gloating about the murders, prompting an investigation by authorities.
The next case involves one of the youngest killers on our list, whose claim of self-defense couldn't hide his violent history, Leighton Ames. On October 3, 2022, Gateshead, UK became the scene of a deadly knife attack that would expose the violent tendencies lurking beneath a baby-faced exterior. Leighton Ames, just 14 years old, stabbed 14-year-old Tomas Olazak to death in White Hills Nature Park, also slashing another youth's coat during the same incident. Despite his young age and innocent appearance, Ames had a disturbing history of violent behavior. But what drives a 14-year-old to carry a knife and use it to eliminate another child? Ames had a documented history of behavioral issues, including being excluded from primary school for threatening to stab a teacher and from secondary school for arson. These warning signs painted a picture of an increasingly violent young man whose behavior was escalating towards something truly dangerous. His decision to carry a knife demonstrated premeditation and awareness of his violent intentions. During the attack in White Hills Nature Park, Ames claimed he was acting in self-defense, but evidence suggested otherwise. The judge noted that while Ames was not the instigator of the confrontation, he had deliberately brought the knife to the scene. The prosecution argued that the stabbing was deliberate and that Ames had shown no remorse for his actions. Ames was arrested shortly after the incident, with his prior violent history becoming crucial evidence in the case against him. His pattern of escalating violence made it clear that this tragedy was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of concerning behavior. On April 17, 2023, Ames was convicted of murder. On June 15, 2023, at age 15, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 12 years. An attempt to refer his sentence as unduly lenient was rejected in December 2023. He will be eligible for parole in 2035. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press that bell icon. But our next case involves perhaps the most disturbing attack on this list, one that targeted the most innocent victims imaginable. Axel Ruda Kobana. On July 29, 2024, Southport, UK witnessed one of the most horrific attacks against children in the country's recent history. Axel Ruda Cubana, 17 years old, carried out a mass stabbing at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class, killing 3 young girls, Alice Dilva Aguirre, 9, B.B. King, 6, and Elsie Stanimo, 7, and injuring 10 others. The attack was described as sadistic and represented a level of evil that shocked even hardened investigators. But what could possibly motivate a teenager to target innocent children at a dance class? Ruda Cubana, born August 7, 2006, to Rwandan parents in Cardiff, had a documented history of concerning behavior. He had been referred to the PREVENT program for concerns about radicalization between 2019 and 2021, but authorities determined no intervention was necessary. His obsession with violence and access to extremist materials should have been red flags that demanded immediate action. The attack itself was planned and methodical, representing months of preparation and planning. Evidence found during the investigation included ricin production materials and an Al-Qaeda training manual, suggesting this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a carefully orchestrated assault designed to maximize casualties. The fact that he targeted a children's dance class made his crimes particularly heinous and demonstrated his complete lack of humanity.
What makes this case even more disturbing is the systematic failure of multiple agencies to prevent this tragedy. Despite being on the radar of various authorities for years, Ruda Cubana was able to plan and execute one of the most horrific attacks against children in recent British history. The missed opportunities to intervene will haunt the families of his victims forever. Ruda Cubana was arrested at the scene after admitting his guilt, showing no remorse for the innocent lives he had taken. His behavior after the attack, including gloating about his actions, demonstrated a complete lack of human empathy or understanding of the magnitude of his crimes. On January 20, 2025, Ruda Cubana pleaded guilty to all charges. 3 days later, on January 23, 2025, at age 18, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 52 years. A request to review his sentence as unduly lenient was rejected in February 2025. He will not be eligible for parole until 2076.
In May 2025, he allegedly attacked a prison officer at HMP Belmar by throwing boiling water, showing his violent behavior continues even behind bars. But our final case proves that some teenage violence defies all logic and reason. Kieran Earnshaw and Luke Kohberger. On January 16, 2020, Huddersfield, UK, witnessed one of the most senseless and brutal murders in the area's history. Kieran Earnshaw, 18, and Luke Kohberger, 15, murdered 53-year-old Robert Wilson outside Thornton and Ross using a samurai sword, striking him over 100 times and attempting to decapitate him. The attack was so savage that it shocked even experienced investigators who had seen countless violent crimes. But what could drive 2 teenagers to commit such an incredibly brutal and senseless murder? Both attackers were heavily intoxicated with alcohol and drugs during the assault, with no clear motive for targeting Robert Wilson. The victim was simply a night shift supervisor trying to do his job when he encountered these 2 violent individuals. The randomness of his selection made the crime even more disturbing. Earnshaw had a documented history of knife-related offenses, including stabbing a boy at school, suggesting a pattern of escalating violence that culminated in this horrific murder. His prior behavior should have been a warning sign of the danger he posed to society. The attack was captured on CCTV and audio equipment, providing investigators with clear evidence of the brutal assault. The footage showed the sustained and vicious nature of the attack, with over 100 strikes delivered to the helpless victim. The evidence was so overwhelming that both defendants had no choice but to plead guilty. The case also revealed the callous attitude of the killers toward their crime. Kohberger wrote rap lyrics boasting about the murder, showing no remorse for taking an innocent man's life.
This demonstrated a complete lack of understanding about the gravity of their actions. Both Earnshaw and Kohberger pleaded guilty to murder. On September 2, 2020, Earnshaw was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years, while Kohberger received 16 years and 8 months. Earnshaw will be eligible for parole in 2042, while Kohberger could be released as early as 2036. From gang initiations to family annihilations to random acts of brutality, these young killers have earned their place behind bars for life. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out